We live in a world that's often very cruel. Social media has become the perfect outlet for people to let their worst side out, choosing to attack instead of encouraging, offending instead of complimenting. These so-called haters, people who spend their time and energy online just spreading their own insecurities, thinking they're shielded by the fact it's a virtual environment, are doing a big disservice to society. Today's story is about a woman who was humiliated online because of her survival scar. Her journey will show us how a single cruel comment can echo through someone's heart, and how one act of grace can echo even louder. This is not just a story about hate. It's a story about resilience, dignity, and the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be defined by other people's bitterness. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand why her scar became the beginning of her transformation. Now, let's begin. Laura stood in front of her bedroom mirror on a Tuesday morning in March, wearing nothing but morning light and courage. 50 years old, 5 years cancer-free, and a diagonal scar across her left chest where her breast used to be. A mark she'd come to see not as damage, but as evidence. Evidence that she'd fought. Evidence that she'd survived. She picked up her phone and opened Instagram. Her feed was the usual parade of perfection-filtered faces, airbrushed bodies, the illusion that beauty meant flawlessness. Laura had played that game once, before the diagnosis. But cancer had clarified what mattered, and what mattered wasn't looking perfect. It was being alive. She raised the phone, angled it to show her face and chest, her scar visible and unapologetic. Snapped the photo. No filter, no editing, just truth. She wrote a simple caption. 5 years cancer-free today. This scar saved my life. It's not damage, it's victory. Her finger hovered over the post button. Part of her whispered to reconsider, but the stronger part, the part that had endured chemo and radiation and the terror of not knowing if she'd survive, pressed post. The first few comments were kind. Friends congratulating her, fellow survivors sharing their stories. For 2 hours, it felt meaningful. Then Blake Winters shared it. Blake was a beauty influencer with 4 million followers. 28 years old, impossibly symmetrical features, a feed that looked like a magazine spread. He screenshotted Laura's photo and posted it with a caption that made her blood run cold. This is exactly what's wrong with social media. Not everything needs to be shared. My feed is curated RT, and now I have to see this? Digital pollution. Keep your imperfections to yourself. Within an hour, it had 10,000 likes. Within 20,000. His followers flooded Laura's comments. Gross. Nobody wants to see that. Have some self-respect. Worse things, too. Cruel, vicious things Laura couldn't read without her hands shaking. Her daughter Emma called, voice tight with anger. "Mom, did you see what that jerk posted? I'm reporting it." Laura sat on her bed, phone trembling in her hands, watching the numbers climb. 50,000 likes on Blake's mockery of her survival. Comments telling her to delete it, to be ashamed, to hide. She thought about her oncologist's words 5 years ago. "You're one of the lucky ones, Laura. You get to live." Lucky. She'd survived cancer, and now strangers were saying that survival was ugly, that the proof of her battle was digital pollution. Laura closed Instagram and sat in silence. Outside birds sang. Inside, shame tried to take root. But underneath, something else stirred. The same determination she'd had when the doctors said cancer, a certainty that this would not be the end of her story. For 3 days, Laura stayed offline. Emma kept her updated. Blake's post had hit 100,000 likes. News outlets picked it up. Debates raged. Did Laura have the right to post an uncomfortable photo? Was Blake's criticism valid or just bullying? Laura ignored all of it. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in years. She painted. Before the diagnosis, Laura had been an art teacher. She'd loved it, the smell of paint, the quiet concentration of students finding their voice. But during treatment, she'd stopped. Recovery required energy art, demanded. Somehow, 5 years had passed without her picking up a brush. Now she stood in her garage-turned-studio, staring at a blank canvas. She thought about Blake's words, digital pollution, imperfections, things that should stay private. And she thought about all the women like her, the ones who'd survived and bore the marks, the ones told their bodies were acceptable only if they hid the truth. She began to paint, not her scar exactly, but the feeling of it, raw reds and deep purples, slashes of white like lightning, gold threading through like hope, abstract, visceral, uncomfortable to look at. She titled it, Evidence. When Emma came over that evening and saw it, she stood silent, then said quietly, "Mom, that's powerful. You should do more." More? Yes, a series, about survival, about what our bodies carry. Emma touched her own abdomen, where she had a C-section scar. We all have marks. Yours just happened to be from saving your life. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about women she'd met in support groups, mothers with stretch marks, accident survivors with scars from surgeries, bodies that bore witness to trauma and healing. What if she painted them all? If you're still here, thank you. We're on a mission to wreck 1,000 subscribers until the end of this year. Subscribe if you'd like to help us share more stories like this, stories about turning cruelty into courage. Your support means the world to us. Let's continue. The next morning, Laura posted again on Instagram. Not herself this time, but her painting. The caption read, "To the person who called my survival digital pollution, thank you. You've reminded me that art is supposed to make people uncomfortable. That truth isn't always pretty. I'm starting a project called The Unfiltered Map. If you have a scar, physical or emotional, that tells a story of survival, I want to paint it. Send me a direct message." She expected maybe a dozen responses. She got 300 in the first day. Laura's garage became a sanctuary. Women came from across Virginia, then neighboring states, then across the country. They came with surgical scars, burn scars, self-harm scars they were learning to forgive, stretch marks they'd been taught to hate, mastectomy scars like Laura's. They came with their stories. There was Patricia, 47, who'd survived a car accident that left her face scarred and her modeling career over. "I thought I was only valuable if I was beautiful," she said. "Took me 10 years to realize I was always more than my face." There was Joy, 52, with a hysterectomy scar and a story about an abusive marriage she'd finally left. "This scar saved my life in a different way," she said. "It was the surgery that made me realize I can survive anything." There was David, 35, who'd had top surgery and wore his scars with quiet pride. "These marks are my truth," he said. "I'm not hiding anymore." Laura photographed them all. Then painted large canvases capturing not just physical scars but emotional weight, the shame, pride, grief, triumph. She painted the way Patricia's eyes held both sorrow and defiance, the way Joy's hand touched her scar like a talisman, the way David's scars looked like wings. 6 months of work, 73 paintings, stories that made her cry, made her rage, made her grateful. Blake Winters never apologized. He doubled down, posting another screenshot. Still trying to make imperfection a brand. How about just taking care of yourself? His followers laughed. But something else was happening. Art critics noticed, gallery owners, women starving for permission to believe their bodies were acceptable. A gallery in Richmond called. They wanted to show the unfiltered map. Laura almost said no. The paintings felt too raw. But Emma insisted. "Mom, this is bigger than you now. These women trusted you with their stories. Let them be heard." Laura said yes. The exhibition opened on a cold November evening. Laura stood surrounded by 73 paintings of survival, hands shaking. The room was packed. Press, critics, survivors, curious strangers. She saw Patricia, Joy, David. She saw women she'd never met, staring at paintings with tears in their eyes, whispering, "That's me," and I thought I was alone. The reviews came fast. The Washington Post called it an unflinching examination of beauty's brutal standards. Art in America praised its raw, emotional honesty. NPR did a feature. Good Morning America wanted Laura on the show. But the moment that broke her came from a teenage girl, maybe 16, standing in front of a painting of self-harm scars, crying quietly, sleeves pulled over her wrists. Laura approached gently. "Are you okay?" The girl turned, eyes red. "I've been clean for 2 years, but I hate my scars. I hate remembering. But this," she gestured at the painting, "this makes them look beautiful, like they're part of my story instead of being the whole story." Laura took her hand. "They are part of your story. Not the end, just a chapter you survived." The girl nodded, crying harder. "Thank you for making me feel less alone." That's when Laura knew. This wasn't about Blake or his cruelty. This was about every person told their body was wrong, their story shameful. Their survival should be hidden. The exhibition sold out. Every single painting. Laura stood in the empty gallery, feeling Emma's arm around her shoulders. "What are you going to do with the money, Mom?" Laura had been thinking about that. She'd made more than she'd made in a decade teaching, enough to retire comfortably. But comfort felt hollow compared to purpose. "I'm starting a foundation," she said. "The Ribbon Fund, for women who want reconstructive surgery but can't afford it. For survivors who want to choose what their healing looks like. Because survival shouldn't come with shame, and choice shouldn't be a luxury." Emma smiled. "That's perfect, Mom." Blake Winters never apologized, but 6 months later, his follower count started dropping. People were tired of curated perfection, tired of filters and the relentless pressure to look flawless. The cultural tide was shifting, and Blake was on the wrong side. 2 years after that first post, Laura sat across from Oprah on national television. The Ribbon Fund had funded surgeries for 200 women. The unfiltered map had traveled to 12 cities. Laura had become a voice for anyone told their body was unacceptable. "What would you say to Blake Winters now?" Oprah asked. Laura thought carefully. "I'd say thank you. His cruelty gave me clarity, made me realize how many of us carry shame about bodies that are just honest. His mockery was meant to silence me, but instead it amplified a conversation that needed to happen. So thank you, Blake. You helped more than you hurt." The interview went viral, not for drama, but for grace. Laura had taken the ugliest moment of her digital life and transformed it into something beautiful. Blake posted a response that night. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement. "I've been thinking about beauty standards and the pressure to be perfect. Laura's right that we all carry marks. I'm sorry for what I said. I was wrong." It wasn't much, but it was something, and Laura, reading it in her studio, felt the last bit of anger dissolve. She didn't need his apology, because the moment he'd tried to shame her, he'd accidentally given her permission to stop caring what people like him thought. And that freedom had been worth everything. Laura is 52 now. The Ribbon Fund has helped over 500 women. The Unfiltered Map became a book, then a documentary, then a movement. Women worldwide started posting unfiltered photos, their scars, their truths. The hashtag #UnfilteredMap has millions of posts, not just from cancer survivors, but from anyone told their body was wrong. Laura still teaches art, but now runs workshops specifically for survivors. She teaches them to see scars not as damage, but as evidence. Evidence of battles fought. Evidence of survival. Evidence they're still here, still fighting, still beautiful in ways the algorithm could never quantify. She thinks sometimes about that Tuesday morning in March, standing in front of her mirror, deciding whether to hit post, about how close she came to choosing silence, about how Blake's cruelty could have destroyed her if she'd let it. But she didn't. Instead, she took that humiliation and asked a different question. Not how do I hide, But how do I help? The answer became the Ribbon Fund, a gallery of survival stories, a movement reminding women, reminding everyone, that beauty isn't about perfection. It's about truth, about showing up in your honest body and refusing to apologize for taking up space. Blake's followers found other influencers. His moment of cruelty became a footnote in a much larger story about cultural change, because that's the thing about trying to shame someone into silence. Sometimes you accidentally give them a megaphone instead. Laura keeps her original post pinned to Instagram. 5 years cancer-free, the scar that saved her life, no filter, no apology, just truth. The comments have changed over time. Now they're mostly from women sharing their own scars, thanking her for making them feel less alone. On quiet mornings, Laura still stands in front of her mirror, 52 years old, 7 years cancer-free. A diagonal scar across her chest that she touches like a prayer. This mark is evidence. Evidence that she fought. Evidence that she survived. Evidence that beauty was never about perfection. It was always about the courage to be seen. And every time someone tells their story, posts their unfiltered truth, chooses honesty over hiding, they prove the same thing, that the algorithm doesn't get to decide who's beautiful, that cruelty doesn't get the last word, that survival, in all its imperfect glory, is the most stunning thing of all. That's Laura's legacy. Not revenge against the man who tried to shame her, but grace extended to every person who's ever felt too scarred, too marked, too honest for a world that demands perfection. Because in the end, the filtered version of beauty was always a lie. And Laura? She chose truth. And truth, it turns out, is what changes the world. Thanks for watching this story until the end. Please subscribe, tell us from which city you're watching, and share your story below, because your scars, whatever they are, deserve to be honored, not hidden. Until next time.